Hi, I just want to talk about the controversy over the Ashbourne Shakespeare um, portrait. And I made a video, which you can see on this channel, where I showed that the portrait of the Ashbourne portrait, if you superimpose it over the portrait of Edward de Vere as a young man, shows that they're essentially the same person, or at least the same uh, face. Um, Now, there's a very simple reason for that, and that is that the way portraiture was done in Elizabethan times was that the artist's studio would make up what's called a style. So they'd sketch your face, and they'd sketch the outlines of your face, show you your nose shape, your eyebrows, the chin line, forehead, and they'd use that they'd make copies of that, and they'd make um, additional uh, additional portraits. If you wanted one later in life, they'd use that, and they'd simply change the hair and the beard, facial hair, clothing, so that you know it was the same person. So the Ashbourne, when you superimpose it over the Edward de Vere portrait as a young man, is clearly the same style. So one would expect that as an older man, de Vere went in to have his portrait done, and they pulled out the same style and used the same style, the same template, and that's why you have the same facial features. It's not that two different people walked in and had an artist by chance paint them to look exactly the same, to have exactly the same facial features. Now, that is the problem with the idea that Hugh Hammersley is the actual sitter in the Ashbourne portrait, because you can look him up on Wikipedia, and you'll see that he essentially bears no, I don't know if you can see that, but he bears no resemblance at all to the Ashbourne. Is the only parts of him which would have been taken from the template are his face, and his eyes and his nose and his eyebrows, his forehead, look nothing like the Ashbourne. So where they should be the same, they're not. The clothing is completely different, and the other difficulty with it is that what it presupposes is that this theory presupposes is that there must have been two portraits of Hugh Hammersley, one in which he dressed as the mayor of London, and another, for some reason, where he dressed like a writer. So there's no way that you could have Hugh Hammersley's portrait turned into a portrait of William Shakespeare, because Hugh Hammersley's portrait is sitting in the haberdasher's hall, and there's no reason why he would have had a second copy made to be turned into a portrait, or for someone to turn into a portrait of William Shakespeare. I mean, it simply doesn't make sense. Of course, the real problem is that Hugh Hammersley's portrait is hanging in the haberdasher's hall in London. So how does one turn into the other? The thing about Edward de Vere's portrait and the Ashbourne is that there's a clear line by which that portrait could have come into the hands of the Ashbourne Grammar School. Because de Vere was married to a woman called Elizabeth Trentham. They had no children. When he died, his property would have been left to her. The portrait would have been hanging on a wall. When she died, she left no heirs, and her estate would have gone to her brother. He had an heir by the name of also Elizabeth Trentham, and she married into the Cockayne family, Thomas Cockayne's family. Thomas Cockayne was an aristocrat who set up who was a founder of the Ashbourne School, and that family continued to be patrons of that school, and I think still are. So there's a very easy way for that portrait to have gone from Edward de Vere to the Ashbourne School, and for that reason it would have been known to be a portrait which was supposed to be of the great writer William Shakespeare. And there's no similar explanation ever given as to why someone would take a portrait of the Mayor of London and turn it into a portrait of William Shakespeare. I mean, why? It doesn't look the same. And there's absolutely no connection between Hugh Hammersley and William Shakespeare anywhere. He wasn't a playwright, he wasn't a writer. And so if you're fishing around for for some reason to take someone's portrait and turn it into a portrait of William Shakespeare, why on earth would you try to find something that the portrait of Hugh Hammersley, and use that? Now, what they seem to be saying on the on the various sites about it, which support this view that it's Hugh Hammersley, is that there's some sort of coat of arms. They're not saying that it looks like him. They're just saying, oh, this coat of arms proves conclusively that it was him. I don't know the answer to that, but what the Folger Gallery seem to have done is to have hired a man by the name of Presley to come in and catalogue all of their paintings. And Folger Gallery, as with so many people, are Stratfordians who must support the view that this Shakespeare simply isn't Edward de Vere. So he has slanted his entire paper that way. And if you look at the Wikipedia page on the Ashbourne portrait, it's essentially a recitation of his conclusions, and there's nothing in it to back it up, because when you go to the notes, the bibliography at the end of the references at the end of the article, it's all to Presley's work in 1993, and if you try to find Presley's work, you'll come up blank, because you have to buy his work and able to read it, and he doesn't actually give, the Wikipedia page doesn't actually give any of the actual explanations that he gives. It simply cites his conclusions. So there you have it. The other difficulty is it doesn't make sense for this portrait to be Hugh Hammersley, because if you think of it this way, the de Vere portrait, if you look at it, is physically the same as has the same facial features as the Ashbourne. So here's what you would have to believe. You'd have to believe that somebody decided to take Hugh Hammersley's portrait, or to take what started out as a portrait of Hugh Hammersley, and when it doesn't look like him in the only important parts, which are his face, and then they painted it and changed it sufficiently to look like someone who they thought was William Shakespeare. How they knew who Shakespeare was to turn it into something that looked like William Shakespeare, we don't know. But let's just say you start out painting with a painting of Hugh Hammersley, or you're painting Hugh Hammersley, and you decide to change it at some point into a portrait of someone who looks like William Shakespeare. On what basis do you make it look like that? And why do you pick Hugh Hammersley in the first place? Because do you have some idea that the Lord Mayor of London is a man who looked like what Shakespeare looked like? Because to me, he looks like the Mayor of London. So I don't know why he's picked out. So having done that, having chosen Hammersley as the model for this painting, you alter it, change the shape of the beard, change the forehead, change the shape of the eyebrows, and the indent in the nose, so that it's a much more aquiline looking nose, so that it looks like this man who we now associate with William Shakespeare through the Ashbourne portrait. And then, for some reason, that portrait that you have chosen to alter is exactly the same as Edward de Vere's facial features. So how does that make any sense? And that alone shows that this is complete nonsense, this Hugh Hammersley story behind this, because it just defies common sense and reason to say that this portrait of the Mayor of London was somehow picked up, changed. And Presley says it was changed in order to conform to the view of what the 19th century view of what William Shakespeare would look like. But just by accident, it seems that they made it look exactly like Edward de Vere. How strange. Anyway, that's the story behind the the reason why I took did the video about the de Vere Ashbourne similarities, and I'll do another video at some point about how I made that video, and it's quite interesting actually. So I'll leave it for now, and I'll see you later.